Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Connor Mercer, and this is Connor Collects. I discuss the history of gaming, my experiences collecting gaming, and today we're going to be discussing the 8th generation onwards and my thoughts on the future of gaming. The 8th generation starts with the Wii U, which came out in 2012. It was the successor to Nintendo's Wii. The Wii U was advertised in a very peculiar way, and a lot of people thought that the controller, which I do not have, it's shaped like a tablet, they thought the controller for the Wii U was just another controller for the Wii, and advertising confusion led to low sales. In 2013, Sony and Microsoft were back with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Xbox had a disastrous launch because Microsoft initially demanded it be online only, which meant that if there was no internet and you just wanted to play a game, you could not. With the disastrous launch of the Xbox One, Sony was able to swoop in and take first place with their PlayStation 4. It is still one of the highest selling consoles ever made. Gaming as a whole has been transitioning more and more to a digital-only landscape, which started in the 7th generation with the Wii 360 and PlayStation 3. Less so on the Wii, but it was still there. Publishers would take their games originally released on disc and release them digitally, which means that you can go on the store on your console and download the game, the full game, no disc required. They have gone all in the last few years, and I'm not too thrilled about it, but we'll get on that later. Xbox was slowly recovering from their disastrous launch, and Sony, again, was on top of the world, but the Wii U was struggling very badly. They had several releases like Mario Kart 8 and Super Smash Bros., both in 2014, which saw modest success, but the writing was on the wall for the Wii U pretty quickly. Another thing that happened in the 8th generation was the expected downfall of the handheld gaming market because of the rise of mobile gaming. The Nintendo 3DS and the Sony PlayStation Vita were expected to fail pretty quickly, and initially both of them did. But the 3DS was able to recover with a hefty price cut and a strong library of games, and the 3DS kept Nintendo afloat during its disastrous Wii U run. The Vita was pretty much dead after a year. With things not looking too great for Nintendo, they had to go all in on their next console, which was the Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch was a handheld console hybrid, which meant it was a handheld that you held in your hands and played, but it also plugged into the TV. There were a few consoles that did this in the past. The Sony PSP in the mid-2000s, in the 7th generation, had TV out functionality, but you could not connect an external controller, so you had to play it on the little handheld unit. And also, games ran on like half the screen. It was a very small screen compared to the full screen, and most people didn't use it. In the 90s, Sega released a portable Genesis called the Sega Nomad, which ate through 6 AA's in about 30 minutes. With the rise of the Nintendo Switch, people realized that handheld gaming still had a place in the market, even with the rise of casual mobile gaming. The success of the Nintendo Switch led to many handheld gaming PC hybrids coming out in the last couple of years, notably the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally. These units are not consoles per se, as they run computer firmware, but they are very similar to the Nintendo Switch in that you can plug them into a monitor and you can play them on the go. Finally, in 2020, Sony and Xbox came back with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series. The Xbox Series was two different consoles, the Series X and the Series S. The Series X was their flagship console with all the biggest hardware specs and the beefiest power, but the Series S was a budget console with no disk drive. Remember how I said they were going all in on digital? They're still trying to. The PlayStation 5 also has a handheld variant, although it is not weaker than the actual PS5. It is simply a cheaper PS5 with no disk drive. Because these consoles launched in the heart of the COVID pandemic, they were very hard to get a hold of. Everyone was at home, everyone wanted one. They were bought up by scalpers, and also PC graphics cards had this issue too. They were bought up by scalpers, and you could only get them on eBay for like 3 times the asking price. I was not buying a PS5 for $1,500. In the last couple years, even Sony and Microsoft have tried to get into the handheld market, but not going all in. Both Xbox and Sony have this thing called Remote Play, which allows anybody to play their console games somewhere else, like on their phone. The Sony PS3 actually started this trend, and a very small amount of games were supported with remote play on the PSP. They didn't run very good because the infrastructure was just not there at the time, but it was refined with the Wii U, the aforementioned gamepad that I don't have. You could play the games on the gamepad, and the Sony PS4 also had remote play. If you had a PS Vita, you could play your PS4 games in bed. Recently, however, Sony released the supposed PlayStation Portal, which allows people to remote play their PS5 games anywhere. I do have a few issues with the Portal. Notably, it is $200, has latency, and doesn't run anything on its own. You need a PS5 to own it. You could play Vita games on the Vita and then also remote play your PS4, but what are you going to do with a Portal if the internet's out? Nothing. There is also a rumored Xbox handheld that has been talked about for a couple months now. Obviously, that hasn't been announced, and it probably won't be, if at all, for a while. But I've honestly wanted an Xbox handheld for a long time because all of my games, all my digital games at least, are on the 360, and I don't feel like rebuying them and then buying a Steam Deck. Yes, digital gaming. The rise of digital gaming has not been fun in my book. They desperately want to control the access to their games, and they've shown this with the recent delisting of Ubisoft's The Crew, which I believe was this year. If you bought that game, you cannot play it anymore. They shut it down. It's online only. It's gone. I don't like that, if you can imagine. If I spend $60 on a game, I want to keep the game. But alas, these days they've gone all in on the digital landscape. Off the top of my head, I believe 80% of all Xbox Series consoles sold is the Series S, which means up to 20% of Xbox gamers right now can even use a disc. Of course, the sales for the Xbox Series X discs have gone down because of that. Another thing that's happened in the last couple of years is the attempted rise of cloud gaming, notably with Google's Google Stadia. The Google Stadia was a platform that you could log onto the internet to and play games over the cloud. It's not a console, it's not a PC, it is a cloud game being streamed from one of Google's data centers. Google Stadia lasted about 4 or 5 years, if that many, and many people point to it as the sign that gaming is just not ready for cloud gaming. That brings me to my next segment, my thoughts and opinions. I don't like the idea of cloud gaming because, I mean, with Netflix, if you have Netflix, you don't own any of the movies on Netflix. And if you have Netflix specifically, you know that they like to take movies off willy-nilly. Netflix does this funny thing where you'll type in the name of the movie you want to watch, and they'll tell you they know what movie it is, but we don't have it. If you go into cloud gaming, they can and will take away your games for any reason. Behind me are a bunch of my favorite Wii and Wii U games. Those are on discs. They can't take that from me. They can pry it from my cold, dead hands. Another thing that's happened in the last couple of years is the rise of the free-to-play, pay-to-win game, such as Fortnite. And I don't hate these per se, but I definitely prefer spending $60 on a game with no add-ons than I do paying $0 for a game and then having to buy stuff just to have an edge. Another thing they've done in the last couple of years with the rise of the free-to-play games is they are now selling you for real money what you used to be able to unlock for free. In the old days, if you were good at a game, you could unlock stuff like characters, skins, etc. These days, you have to buy them. That's stupid. Gaming has also become, I think the word is sloppy. I mean, they are re-releasing old games as incomplete, buggy messes. The first thing that comes to my mind is the recent Star Wars Battlefront collection. These games were 4 gigabytes when they came out. There's 2 games, 4 gigabytes each, and they were completed. There were not bugs, at least there were not significant bugs, and the Battlefront collection was 50 gigabytes at least, and filled with so many bugs they were damn near unplayable. These days, you also have to install your games to the hard drive, even if you have the disc. I'm old enough to remember when you could just pop a game in and play with seconds of loading time and not hours. So that's another thing I miss that I probably will never see again as long as I live, which sucks. It's not all doom and gloom at the very least. There are things going on that I still like. I do believe that Nintendo is at the top of their game. The Nintendo Switch is awesome, even if the menu interface is devoid of any personality. But the games are great. The last game I got on the Switch was, I believe, Super Mario Bros. Wonder. And it's very easy, but it's also very fun. and it looks great. There's no bugs, there's no glitches, and it's complete. You don't have to buy anything else. 60 bucks for the game, and that's it. That's great. I've also noticed in the last few years that while a lot of AAA developers have been slacking off, there has been a significant rise in the indie marketplace, which is basically people not funded by big studios making their own games. And that's pretty cool. A lot of these games are pretty good. My favorite is probably Kerbal Space Program, which used to be an indie until they got bought out by Take-Two, but we're not talking about that. Things have definitely been interesting in the last few years, and the future is definitely uncertain. But I don't mean doom and gloom uncertain, I mean nobody knows what's going to happen next. If I had to take a guess, I don't think cloud gaming is going to gain a significant foothold because people just don't like it that much. I mean, you don't want to play a game with like a full second of latency. Imagine like pressing a button and the game doesn't react for a full second. That's cloud gaming. I also don't believe that Xbox is going to stick around longer than 10 years, probably less. Things didn't look too great for them a few months ago. There were rumors that Xbox was going to go third party, or the way of the Sega. It was pushed off. They're not going for it yet. They are intending on releasing new hardware supposedly this year, probably an Xbox Pro, whatever it would be called. But I don't see them lasting to, let's say, the PlayStation 7. I just don't see that happening. Microsoft has been transitioning to an Xbox brand instead of an Xbox console, and I think sooner than later they are going to have Xbox games on PC, as in they're going to have Xbox branded games, not Xbox console games. I do think Nintendo is still going to be around and still kicking very proudly. The Nintendo Switch is one of the best-selling consoles ever made. It's on the top 10, I believe, off the top of my head. And people have been desperately waiting for the Switch 2 for a long time. Ah, yes, the elusive Switch 2. A couple of years ago, there were rumors that we would get a Switch Pro, which would be just an improved Switch with better hardware, and that never happened. So people have been clamoring desperately for a successor console for the last 2 years. And Nintendo will not tell us anything. They won't acknowledge that it exists. They won't tell us when it's coming out. They will not tell us lickety-split. But we do know the Switch 2 is going to happen eventually. You don't just release one of the best-selling pieces of hardware on the planet and then not make a new one. That's just bad business. Now, as for my personal favorites from the last 10 years, this is a Wii U. I don't have the gamepad with me. It's a little tablet controller that you can play the games on if you wanted to. But I have the console here itself, and it is one of my favorite consoles ever. The gamepad is very fun. The games themselves are very fun. As you can see, the about dozen or so games behind me, I want to say 2 dozen, and I just have a blast playing the Wii U. And I honestly don't play the Switch as much as I thought I would because all of my favorite games are still on the Wii U. As for collecting, I do have an Xbox One. I have the Wii U, of course. I do have a PlayStation Vita, like I mentioned, and my brother has a PS4, so any PS4 games I want to play, I can play on the Vita with the remote play. And yeah, there is a little bit of latency, but there are some games where it's just not a problem. Like RPGs are pretty good, even with a little bit of latency, because they're turn-based. You're taking your turn. You don't have to worry about frame-perfect inputs or aiming at precise timing, etc., etc. I also recently got a Series X and a PlayStation 5, and they were not easy to get, but we got them. I don't really use the PS5 as much as I thought I would, which honestly surprises me because it was so hard to get a hold of. You'd think that there's a lot of stuff to do with it, and all I've really done with it is Spider-Man. Not a lot of stuff on the PS5 interests me that much, which kind of sucks because, you know, it was $500. I do use my Series X a lot more, mostly because all of my Xbox games are already there from the 360 and One, and they carried over. If I had a PS4 of my own, I probably would get more use out of the PS5 because all of the PS4 games work. But I didn't grow up with the PS4, so I don't have one. I don't have any attachment to the PS4. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Connor Collects. I don't know if there's going to be any more episodes because this was a mini-series about the quote-unquote 4 eras that I've dubbed. But if I were to keep going in the future, I would probably go into more specific areas. I did a very broad, very, not rushed, but I skimmed over a lot of stuff. So the future of this show would hypothetically be much more specific. Like I might have an episode on just the Wii U or a specific game series like Mario Kart, But for now, that's everything. So thank you for watching, and please be sure to rate and subscribe if you're interested in any more. Have a good one.